You know a man like this, or maybe you are him. Something happened. Not a bad day, not a rough patch. Something that broke the actual structure, the job, the relationship, the identity, the version of life that made sense. And instead of falling apart permanently, something inside him got quieter, clearer, harder to rattle. The people around him call it a comeback, but he knows that's not what happened. He didn't come back. The man who existed before doesn't exist anymore. What's standing here is something that couldn't have been built without everything that fell apart first. This video isn't about whether some men survive what breaks them. It's about something more uncomfortable. Why the breaking was the only thing that could build what's standing now, and why not everyone who breaks comes out the other side. The variable isn't the trauma, it's what happens in the silence after. In 1996, psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun named something they'd been observing in trauma survivors that didn't fit the existing framework. They called it post-traumatic growth. Not resilience. That distinction matters. Resilience is the elastic band. It stretches under pressure and returns to its original shape. PTG is what happens when the elastic doesn't return, when the pressure changes what it is entirely. Tedeschi and Calhoun documented 5 domains where this growth happens: personal strength, new possibilities, deeper relationships, appreciation of life, and a changed worldview. Not one of those domains means going back to how things were. Every single one is forward motion into territory the previous version couldn't access. But here's the part nobody says out loud. Post-traumatic growth doesn't replace the pain. It coexists with it. The man who grew didn't stop hurting. He didn't get over it. He carries it. But what he carries transformed the structure underneath. And the mechanism has a single variable that determines whether a man emerges different or stays in the wreckage. It's not willpower. It's not the severity of what happened. It's 2 types of processing. Intrusive rumination sounds like this. Why did this happen to me? It's the loop, circular, exhausting, returning to the same wound without producing anything from it. It excavates. The man gets stuck there, not because he's weak, but because his mind is doing exactly what it does when a structure collapses, searching for what went wrong. Deliberate rumination sounds like this. What did this reveal about who I am? Same pain, different direction. The mind beginning to process what the breaking made visible. Values that didn't break, capacities that only appeared under pressure, the parts of the foundation that held when everything else fell. PTG happens in the shift from intrusive to deliberate, not when the pain stops, when the processing changes direction. If this distinction between replaying and rebuilding already feels like something you recognize, subscribe to Quiet Psychology. What comes next goes into what this process actually costs, and why not everyone makes it through. A man wrote about losing his father in 2016. He quit drugs. He was alone. He was broke. He wrote, "More myself than ever." He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't saying it was worth it. He said, "I wonder what I could have been, but I had to go through all that." That's deliberate rumination in its most honest form. Not answers, not resolution, a different relationship with the wreckage. And before the clarity, before the new worldview, there's one place it almost always starts: the body. When everything is gone, the one thing that doesn't require explanation or permission is physical. The iron doesn't lie. The weight doesn't care who validated you before. The body is the first territory a man reclaims when the rest is still ruins. Not because it solves anything, because it's honest. And in the middle of everything that stopped making sense, honesty is the only thing that still does. Now let's not romanticize it. The breaking hurts. Losing a job is losing income, identity, a version of yourself that knew what tomorrow looked like. Losing a relationship is losing a future you'd built entire assumptions around. Losing health, losing a parent, losing the life that made sense. That's not a setup for a story. That's waking up one morning, not knowing who you are, without the things that told you. That disorientation has a name. Psychologist Ronnie Janoff Bullman called it shattered assumptions. The framework most men carry without knowing, that the world is basically fair, that what happens makes sense, that they are fundamentally capable of holding things together. These assumptions aren't conscious, they're the air, the background operating system. Trauma shatters them, and the period after, before new assumptions form, is the most dangerous phase. Not because a man is falling apart, because he has no map. The old version stopped working, the new one hasn't arrived, and the temptation in that space is to rebuild the same structure, different materials, same blueprint, because at least the blueprint is familiar. From the outside, he looks like he's processing. From the inside, there's no flaw. And here's where it gets dark. Not every man who breaks gets stronger. Some break and stay in the wreckage, not because they're weaker, because they're trapped in the wrong type of processing. The loop. Why did this happen to me? Doesn't build, it excavates. PTG requires the shift. What did this reveal about me? The man who got bitter didn't fail. He got trapped in the first stage, and no one told him there was another gear. The distance between emergence and stagnation isn't character, it's the difference between replaying the destruction and rebuilding the meaning. If you're in the loop right now, that loop is the first stage, not the only stage. The problem isn't being in it. The problem is when the replay never shifts into rebuild. So the question worth sitting with, are you rebuilding, or are you rebuilding the same thing that already collapsed? There's a point where the loop begins to exhaust itself, not because you decided to stop, because the mind can only replay the same destruction so many times before it stops producing new information from it. That exhaustion isn't failure. It's the door. A man at 61, paycheck to paycheck, no traditional markers of anything, wrote this. I no longer need to be liked, happiest I've ever been. That's not positivity. That's what happens when an assumption, I need external approval to be okay, gets shattered and never rebuilt. Not because he chose optimism, because the wreckage proved the assumption was wrong, and rebuilding it would have been dishonest. That's what stronger actually means here. Not calmer, not more confident, more precise. The lenses that distorted the view, what you needed, who you had to be, what would finally make things make sense, they broke. What the breaking produced isn't a better version of those lenses, it's vision without them. Janoff Bullman's research shows this directly. The worldview built after trauma is not more optimistic. It's more accurate. The assumptions that collapsed were distortions. What you're building now doesn't rest on distortions. The man who started boxing at 68, competing at 75, not despite the years, because of what the years removed from him about what was still possible. The timeline he'd assumed for himself had already been shattered. What remained was available. I wonder what I could have been, but I had to go through all that. Not resolution, precision, the kind that only comes from having every false assumption systematically removed. There's a Japanese practice called kintsugi. When pottery breaks, you don't discard it, you repair it with gold. The fracture lines become visible, gilded, traced in something valuable. The bowl that was never broken is smooth, unmarked, untested. The bowl that broke and was repaired with gold carries a record. The cracks are there for anyone to see. No pretense, no concealment. But the gold in the seams is stronger than the original clay. Not because gold is harder, because the repair was chosen. Someone sat with the broken pieces, decided they were worth keeping, and put them back together with something more valuable than what was there before. You're not the man before the breaking, you're the man in the repair. And the gold, the clarity, the precision, the capacity that didn't exist in the version before wasn't something you were born with. It was built in the space between the shattering and the decision to stay. The scars didn't disappear, they became the record. If you broke, and what stands now is something the version before couldn't have built, you already know. Not because you're healed, because you're still carrying it, and carrying it changed what you're able to build. The fracture lines aren't weakness, they're evidence. If you're in the wreckage right now, old version stopped, new hasn't arrived. This in-between is the most dangerous and most important stage. It won't feel like progress. But if the loop is starting to exhaust you, if why me is losing its grip, that exhaustion isn't failure. It's the door. If you broke and rebuilt, or if you're in the middle of it right now, say it in the comments. Not for us, for the man scrolling through at 2 a.m. looking for proof that what he's going through has a name, a shape, and an end that doesn't look like this forever.